This video tutorial demonstrates how to add annotations to selections in Raven. We'll cover adding an annotation column to a selection table, adding specific annotations to individual selections, and using selection labels to display annotations in views. In addition to measurements, which are numerical values that Raven calculates from the data in a view, Raven selection tables can include annotations. Annotations consist of text that can be entered manually or automatically by a detector. Annotations can be used to add any type of information you want to a selection. Common uses for annotations include indicating call types, species or individual identities, age, sex, or behavioral context of calling animals. For example, let's look at this chestnut-sided warbler song included in the Raven Examples folder. The song consists of 12 syllables of 5 different shapes that we could identify as types A, B, C, and U and D for up and down. To apply annotations as I make selections around these syllables, right-click on the header row of the selection table and choose Add Annotation Column. Raven then asks me to supply a name for the annotation column. I'll call it Type and click OK. You can see that there's now an extra column in the table with a column name Type. Now I'll draw a selection. When I commit the selection by pressing Enter, Raven displays a dialog box asking me to enter the text for the type annotation for this selection. I'm going to enter A for the syllable type, and I'm going to check this box to indicate that I want Raven to enter this value by default until further notice. This will save me some typing when committing subsequent selections. Then I'll click OK. Notice in the table that the annotation A appears in the type column. Now I'll create a selection for the next syllable of the same shape or type. When I press Enter to commit it, Raven again asks for the type, but this time Raven automatically fills in A by default, so all I have to do is press Enter. I'll continue to do that now for the 2 more syllables of the same type. Now I'll create a selection for the first syllable of type B. This time I change the default value of A to B and again click the checkbox to tell Raven to use this value as the default. I'll go ahead now and in this way add annotations to all of the remaining syllables. Now I've made selections for all of the syllables, and you can see in the table that each selection has an entry in the type column to indicate the different syllable types. Often, it's helpful to have annotations displayed directly on the spectrogram. You can do this using selection labels. To display annotations using selection labels, right-click on the spectrogram and choose Configure Selection Labels from the menu. A dialog appears that lets you control what text is shown in the selection labels that Raven displays above each selection box in the spectrogram. By default, Raven displays just the selection ID above each selection. However, you can also display the value of any column currently in the selection table, which you can select from the scrolling list on the right side of the dialog. If you scroll down in this list, you'll see the Type Annotation field. To add type to the selection label, just double-click on it, and you'll see the type labels appear next to the selection IDs immediately. By default, Raven separates items in the selection label, such as the selection ID and the type annotation in this case, by a space. You can change how the items are separated in the selection label by editing the item separator field here. For example, if you want to display a colon followed by a space between the selection ID and the type, just enter those characters here. If you want to change an existing annotation, you can just double-click in the annotation cell in the table and enter the text there. For example, perhaps I change my mind and decide that I want to call the last two syllable types X and Y instead of U and D. I just double-click in those cells and backspace over U or D and enter X or Y. I can also change the name of an annotation column. For example, suppose I decide that I want to call this annotation syllable instead of type. I can do that by right-clicking the column header and choosing Rename Column, then typing the new name. That wraps up our introduction to annotations and selection labels. Thanks for watching.